Okay, question 1. John is training for a job as a housekeeper at a hotel. The hotel requires that towels be folded in a certain way. The first 2 times John folded towels, he did it incorrectly. Now, whenever John folds towels, his supervisor will praise him for doing it the right way, but will not praise him when he does it the wrong way. What best describes this type of intervention? All right, pretty clearly a differential reinforcement scenario, right? The giveaway is praising him for doing it the right way, but not praising him when he does it the wrong way, reinforcing one behavior, other behaviors on extinction, clear differential reinforcement. So now it's our job to figure out what type of differential reinforcement do we want to choose, okay? So let's go through our process. I always start with DRO, okay? Think about DRO. What is DRO? DRO, we are delivering reinforcement for the absence of a behavior. When is reinforcement being delivered in this scenario? Well, when John performs the behavior the right way. So the behavior occurs, reinforcement is delivered, it can't be DRO. So we've eliminated DRO. DRI and DRA are our next 2 options, right? They're very similar, okay? And the fact that they reinforce one behavior and put another behavior on extinction, okay? However, DRI means a behavior that can't occur at the same time as the other behavior. They're different topographies. DRA, the behaviors can occur simultaneously. Can John fold a towel both correctly and incorrectly? Well, no, you can't get it right and not right at the same time, okay? It's like answering a question. Either you're going to get the question right, you're going to get it wrong. John folding the towel correctly is incompatible with folding the towel incorrectly. So the intervention here is going to be a DRI. So whenever you get a differential reinforcement question, just break it down simply like that. Start with DRO, determine if it is, and then go to DRI and DRA. Very simple. You've worked with the same client for 2 years. The client has started to have suicidal thoughts and it is unclear why. The client's mom asks if you can provide counseling for the client. How should you respond? Okay, especially during COVID, this wasn't an uncommon thing, unfortunately. Some depression, some suicidal thoughts, and a lot of families wanting to know how we could help, okay? So in your case, you're being asked to counsel the child, okay? You have to consider working within your scope, okay, as a technician, as a behavior technician. Your role as a technician is to implement ABA intervention plans designed by supervisors, okay? You have to consider your training. Unless you were a counselor in your previous job or you're trained, right? You're not qualified to provide this counseling, okay? So you need to consider that when you're asked these type of questions, right? When in doubt, what do we do as RBTs? We refer to our supervisor, okay? So the client's mom here says, can you please provide counseling for my daughter or my son? How do you respond? A, counsel the client to the best of your ability. No, right? Unless for some reason you're trained in counseling, and even then, you would have to set up a different agreement. And you can't just jump into counseling for suicidal thoughts. It's a very serious thing, okay? There's not a lot of room for error here. So A is definitely not correct. B, talk with your client about the suicidal thoughts and make a note in your session notes. Again, you're dealing with something very serious here. If this comes up, you should immediately report to your supervisor, okay? Your supervisor needs to know about this, right? This client needs to be able to get the help they need for their suicidal thoughts, okay? So just jumping in and talking about them without training, without guidance, okay, is unethical and it's irresponsible. B, report it to your supervisor and start designing interventions. Yes, report it, but then going in and designing interventions, okay, is not the right play. Remember, thoughts are what we consider private events. Private events are behavior, but we don't deal with private events because we can't observe and measure thoughts. So we can't just start dealing or designing interventions for these thoughts that we can't observe or measure. That leaves us with D, decline and report it to your supervisor, okay? Yes, right? Say, I am not qualified, or I need to talk to my supervisor first, or however you want to politely say no. Do it and then report to your supervisor. Acknowledge the seriousness of the situation, okay? And then game plan how we're going to proceed. Maybe we can find a resource for the parent, right? Maybe we can help them in other behavioral ways, okay? But a serious situation like this should be immediately reported to your supervisor, and then you go from there. A catering company prepares meals for weddings and other ceremonies. The company's pastry maker is attempting to improve the number of pastries she can make per hour. What is the pastry maker trying to change in regards to pastry making? Okay, so a key giveaway here, right? We know they're trying to change some sort of their behavior, some aspect of their behavior, okay? She's trying to improve the number of pastries she can make per hour, right? She wants to be quicker, increase how many she has per hour, okay, increase her efficiency. So what is she trying to change? Well, the key here, right, is the number of pastries. So we know we're trying to count something, right? We're dealing with a count, okay? If she was talking about how quickly, okay, or the time it takes to make a number of pastries, then maybe we start talking about IRT or duration. But since we're dealing with a number, a count, okay, we know we're probably dealing with rate or frequency. Then she adds per hour. So that changes things from simply frequency or count to an actual rate. So she needs to improve the rate of her pastry making, okay? And so what is the difference between frequency and rate? Frequency is simply a count. You're just counting how many times something occurs. If the company's pastry maker wanted to increase from 100 pastries to 200 pastries, well, then we can do a frequency count, right? Because now we're just counting. But she wants to throw in a time component, and rate is simply frequency over time. So not only is she going to improve the number of pastries, right? She's also increasing her speed, the number she can make per hour. Rate is number of pastries per hour, or frequency over time, okay? This is a very simple question, one that you should answer 15, 20, 30 seconds at most, okay? The easy questions on the RBT exam, like I always say, are questions you should answer very quickly. If you're prepared, you will be able to answer these questions extremely fast. If you just started studying, don't worry if you still need some time, okay? The most important thing when you're just starting to study is that you get the right answer. It doesn't matter how long it takes to get to the right answer. Just get the right answer, okay? And then move on. Speed will come as you get better and as you spend more time on it. You're taking whole interval data on your client's toothbrushing. Your client is required to brush their teeth for 2 minutes straight. You're taking data in 20-second intervals. You record the following data. 1, 20 seconds, 2, 19 seconds, 3, 20 seconds, 4, 20 seconds, 5, 8 seconds, 6, 20 seconds. How many responses should you record? Okay, again, simple data collection question, okay? You just need to analyze the data and then choose how many responses you ultimately record. We know it's whole interval, okay? So for whole interval, the behavior has to occur when? It has to occur during the entire interval for it to count, right? Remember, partial interval is only partially during the interval or at all. Momentary time sampling is at the very end of an interval. Whole interval, it needs to occur for the whole interval, which happens to be 20 seconds. So in each interval, the behavior needs to occur for 20 seconds, okay? So now we look at our data, and we find how many intervals did the behavior occur for 20 seconds. Well, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. How many responses do we record? 4. Again, super easy data collection question. If you know what whole interval data is, and if you know how to read numbers, okay? What you should. This is not too difficult of a question. Tim and his brother get into a fight. Their dad sends them to their rooms and tells them once they calm down, they can come out of their rooms. After 10 minutes, Tim calms down and Dad allows Tim to come out of his room. Dad letting Tim come out of his room is a type of what? Be careful here, okay? Tim and his brother are fighting. Dad sends them to their rooms, tells them to calm down, okay? Which to us looks like some sort of attempt at punishment, okay? But we're not looking at that aspect. What aspect of the question are we looking at? We're looking at Dad allowing Tim to come out of his room, okay? Always know what the question is asking. If the question is long or full of information, okay, only focus on the relevant information. We're just looking at Dad letting Tim come out of his room. What type of reinforcement or punishment is this? Well, what is Tim doing? Tim is escaping his room, right? Dad is removing this punishment or removing this timeout, okay? He's allowing Tim to come out of his room in response, okay, to Tim calming down, okay? So we're trying to increase Tim's behavior of calm, okay? Tim calms down, okay? We reinforce by letting him escape the room. What positive or negative punishment or reinforcement is known as escape? Is that positive reinforcement? Well, no, because we're adding something with positive reinforcement. Is it negative reinforcement? Yes, escape is a type of negative reinforcement. If, let's say your client gets out of doing work, right? They escape from work, well, they've been negatively reinforced for their behavior that got them out of work. Tim is being negatively reinforced by coming out of his room, okay? He's escaping this timeout or whatever Dad considers this procedure. It's not punishment, it's not positive or negative punishment because we want to increase Tim's calming down, right? We don't want Tim to cry, okay? We don't want to punish Tim calming down, okay? We want to increase that. So Dad letting Tim come out of his room is a type of negative reinforcement. Brian gets a job washing and detailing cars. This is Brian's first job. You work with Brian on washing his parents' car for 2 weeks before he started work. Once Brian got to work, he was able to wash cars, trucks, and vans. Brian is demonstrating what? Okay, so he's clearly taking the skills you taught him to his job, which is fantastic, right? You taught him how to wash a car, he got to work, he's now washing cars, trucks, and vans. Your procedure was apparently effective. What is this considered, though? If Brian learned a response, okay, and he uses it in a situation when he's presented with a stimulus, in this case a car, and then he can do that same response across multiple stimulus, such as cars, trucks, and vans. Well, what is this considered? Is this shaping? No, because shaping, can already do the behavior, right? So we're not trying to build up to the behavior. He can already wash a car. Task analysis, we're not breaking down car washing. Again, he can already do the car washing. He's just demonstrating it across multiple stimuli, okay? So this response generalization or stimulus generalization. Response generalization is what? Response generalization is multiple responses as in the presence or in reaction to one stimulus. How many responses are we looking at here? We're only looking at one. We're looking at washing. How many stimuli? Well, we have 3. We have cars, trucks, and vans. So we're actually looking at stimulus generalization. He takes the response of washing a car and generalizes it across multiple stimuli, across cars, trucks, and vans. Brian demonstrates stimulus generalization. Response generalization, stimulus generalization are difficult concepts, especially if you just started studying, okay? So if you don't understand that question quite yet, it's okay. Come back to it. Study a little more, do a little more practice on your terms, definitions, and flashcards, and then come back to this question and see how you feel about it, okay? Kind of a tricky question, okay? But a good stimulus response generalization question. The basic reinforcement schedule, this basic reinforcement schedule is the only basic reinforcement schedule that is considered continuous. All right, what is this question asking? This question is asking, what do we consider a continuous schedule? Okay, remember, think about continuous reinforcement, CRF. What is CRF? Right, well, that's also known as FR1. If we are continuously reinforcing, okay, we are reinforcing every instance of a behavior on an FR1 schedule. Every response gets reinforced. Every other type of reinforcement schedule is considered intermittent, okay, because not every response gets reinforced. So the only basic reinforcement schedule that's considered continuous is a fixed ratio, okay? FR1, CRF, continuous reinforcement, okay? They're both considered continuous reinforcement. Any sort of variable ratio, any sort of fixed interval, any sort of variable interval is considered intermittent. Variable ratio and variable interval, obviously, because we're taking an average amount and the number is changing. Fixed interval, if we set that interval at 30 seconds, okay, they can respond as much as they want, but they're not going to receive reinforcement until this 30 seconds has passed, okay? So the only time we're delivering continuous reinforcement is on an FR1, a fixed ratio 1 schedule. Your client is not receptive to making choices. So far, your preference assessments have been unsuccessful. Your BCBA recommends the next time you're at the client's house, you observe your client playing with their toys and record how long the client plays with each toy. What type of assessment is your BCBA suggesting? Okay. We want to do a preference assessment. Preference assessments are very important as an RBT. You should constantly be doing preference assessments. Remember, our preferences constantly change. We want new reinforcers as often as we can, okay, so we don't satiate on old reinforcers, but you're having a problem running preference assessments because your client is not making choices, okay? And if your client can't make choices, okay, that kind of rules out a forced choice assessment, okay, because you're presenting two items, and if they can't make a choice, then they might just pick the right item every time or the left item every time, or they might not care, right? Or if you're doing a multiple stimulus assessment and you're asking them to choose from an array of items, they might just swipe the items. They might not play with the items, okay? It's been unsuccessful. So in response, you want to now just observe your client playing with their toys and recording how long they're playing with each toy. You're not asking them to make a choice. You're simply observing and recording. And when we observe and record, okay, what are we doing? Are we doing a forced choice assessment? No, for all the reasons we just said, okay? We're not forcing them to make a decision. What about a multiple stimulus assessment? Again, no, you're simply observing. You're not contriving a scenario where they're picking out of a group of multiple stimuli. What about a reinforcer assessment? No, remember, preference assessments and reinforcer assessments are two different things, okay? Reinforcer assessments are what we do after preference assessments, when we can actually figure out, okay, what items change behavior, okay? Not the case here. So that leaves us with a naturalistic assessment. What is naturalistic? It's when you're using the environment, okay, to your advantage, right? We're simply looking for situations. We're not contriving things too much, okay? We're simply observing and reacting. In this case, you're observing your client playing with their toys, and you're just recording how long they play with each toy. So you are conducting a naturalistic assessment. There's no contrived choices, okay? No contrived scenarios. This is our option when we can't get them to choose, okay, or when there's no clear hierarchy. The treatment plan calls for extinction of all behavior that involves aggression. In order for extinction to be effective, extinction must what? Okay, so hard to figure out the answer to this choice. Sometimes you can read the question and you already know the answer. In this case, we don't know, okay? We're just looking for the answer that describes extinction as an effective process, okay? What do we do to make extinction effective? A, also include a punishment component. That's definitely not true, right? We don't need to include punishment in extinction. Extinction is not a punishment, and we don't have to include a punishment in extinction, okay? So A is definitely out. B, be implemented only by the trained technicians. Well, it should be implemented by the trained technicians, but extinction to work properly needs to be implemented by the family, by the siblings, by the teachers, by the whole team, okay? Not only by technicians, but by everybody, right? We don't want extinction implemented only some of the time. So C, be the only intervention in place. No, extinction is most effective with a replacement behavior component with it, okay? That leaves us with D, be implemented 100% of the time or as close as possible. Absolutely, okay? If we want extinction to be effective, it needs to be implemented 100% of the time or as close as humanly possible. If we're only implementing extinction 60, 70% of the time, well, we're reinforcing the behavior the other 30%. And extinction, by definition, is removing all reinforcement. So in a lot of ways, we might actually be making the behavior worse, okay? If you're reinforcing every 3 out of 10 times the behavior happens, well, you're creating a new reinforcement schedule. We need to be on extinction every 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 times. So in order for extinction to be effective, extinction must be implemented 100% of the time, or as close to as possible, and by everybody on the team, including parents, including siblings. And finally, a prompt evokes a behavior that you want to increase or teach. If you're teaching a client using discrete trials, which of the following answer choices accurately represents a correct prompt sequence? So this question was to know, when does the prompt occur during discrete trials? And the reason we're going to ask this question is because it's a super common mistake for RBTs to prompt in the incorrect place. A lot of times you see RBTs prompting after the response occurs or before we deliver the SD. Remember, the prompt takes the place of the SD temporarily, which is why we fade prompts, which is why we transfer stimulus control, because the prompt becomes the SD, okay? So it doesn't come after the feedback, it doesn't come after the response. The prompt has to come before the response. So we can immediately eliminate C. That leaves us an A, right? The prompt comes before the response. So A and C are out. That leaves us with B and D, okay? So does the prompt come before the SD or after the SD? The prompt comes after the SD. Our proper sequence is I deliver the SD, I then prompt, there's a response, I deliver my consequence or my feedback, I pause, and then I deliver again. That prompt becomes the SD in our scenario, okay? If you deliver the prompt after the consequence, okay, the response has already happened. We're not prompting anything, okay? That prompt needs to follow the SD, but come before the response to be most effective. Okay, I hope you enjoyed. As always, please like and subscribe if you are. Remember to check out our study materials at rbtexamreview.com. All those links will be in the comments and description below. Other than that, keep working hard, keep studying hard, keep sending in your questions. Okay, we've got another video coming Wednesday. We also have our BCBA exam series that has started. That's every Friday, so be on the lookout for that. I'll see you soon. Keep working hard. It's going to pay off, okay? And I'll see you Wednesday.